Have you ever wondered what happens when a man's most cruel words, intended to bury his ex-wife's dignity, become the biggest joke in Buenos Aires high society? This isn't a Hollywood fantasy. It's a chillingly real story. It's a story about how the darkest shadows can devour those who cast them. And in just 2 weeks, a magnate's world would completely collapse when the woman he thought he had erased appeared on the cover of a prestigious magazine, with a man whose name could buy and sell his entire empire. This is the chronicle of how a silenced woman became the most envied person in the city. The air in the grand ballroom of the Hotel Alvear Palace was thick with the scent of old money and boundless ambition. It was the annual gala of the Legado Foundation, an event that, more than charity, was a silent, brutal calculation of the social hierarchy of the Argentine elite. At the center of one of the most fawning circles was Leonardo Bianchi. At 52, he was a man sculpted by ambition. His real estate empire, Bianchi Desarrollos, was a testament to his cruelty, and his recent divorce was, in his eyes, another successful acquisition. Freedom. Clinging to his arm was Valentina, a 28-year-old influencer whose main skill was to appear perpetually surprised and delighted. Her laugh was a high, tinkling sound that punctuated Leonardo's grandiose declarations. "The market is talking, but only for the bold. Not for dead weight," Leonardo declared to a captive audience of fund managers and their wives. He gave Valentina a possessive squeeze on the waist, a gesture that went unnoticed by no one. He was talking about business, but everyone knew he was also talking about Sofia. His divorce from Sofia Rios, his wife of 25 years, had been finalized 6 months earlier. For over 2 decades, Sofia had been the silent partner in his ascent. She was the one who had charmed the old aristocratic families, who remembered the names of their children and their favorite charities, who had transformed his austere, modernist penthouse into a warm and welcoming home, where deals were sealed at her perfectly orchestrated dinner parties. She had put her promising career as an art historian on indefinite hold to build the Bianchi empire. Her payment was a summary execution of their marriage, delivered on their 25th anniversary. Later that night, fueled by aged champagne and an outrageously inflated sense of self, Leonardo was at his peak near the silent auction tables. Marco Gomez, a rival developer, approached with a playful smile. "Leonardo, good to see you," Marco began, his eyes flicking to Valentina. "You look revitalized." "I am, Marco. I've cut out carbs." Leonardo chuckled, and his cronies laughed along. "And other unnecessary baggage." Speaking of which, Marco lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I saw Sofia the other day at the Malba. She was just there." The unspoken words hung in the air. She looked diminished. She looked lost. She looked old. Leonardo's face hardened. The mere mention of her name felt like a stain on his triumphant night. He wanted the world to see him as a reborn man, not as a man who had simply traded his wife for a newer model. He needed to control the narrative. "Sofia," he said, his voice just loud enough for several people to turn. He adopted a look of feigned pity. "The poor thing. I wish her all the best. I truly do. But let's be honest." He leaned in, his voice a theatrical whisper that carried across the polished marble. "The woman is 48. She gave me the best years of her life, and I'm grateful." He paused for dramatic effect. "But she's past her expiration date. She's simply too old for the dating game now. Who's going to want a woman her age starting over? It's a tragedy, really." The words were a dagger, sharp and precise. Some people winced. Some of the women, Sofia's contemporaries, exchanged uncomfortable glances, but the men nodded with a kind of grim understanding. Valentina simply laughed, tightening her grip on his arm, her youth a shield against the casual cruelty of his statement. What Leonardo didn't notice was the quiet figure standing just behind a large floral arrangement. Carmen Damian, Sophia's best friend, and a well-connected journalist who had heard every poisonous word. Her eyes narrowed, and she discreetly typed a note into her phone. Miles away, in a quiet apartment in Recoleta that felt more like a library than a home, Sofia Rios was unaware of the latest public nail her ex-husband was hammering into the coffin of her dignity. She was surrounded by books on Renaissance art, the scent of old paper a comforting balm. The divorce had left her financially secure, but emotionally hollow. She had spent 25 years orbiting Leonardo, her own light dimmed so his could shine brighter. Now, in the sudden darkness, she felt invisible. Her phone buzzed. It was Carmen. "Sophia, are you sitting down?" Carmen's voice was tight with fury. "I'm always sitting these days," Sophia replied with a weak laugh. "What's wrong?" Carmen recounted the conversation, word for brutal word. Sophia listened in silence, her hand clenching the armrest of her chair so hard her knuckles went white. Every syllable was a physical blow. Past her expiration date. Too old to date. A tragedy. It wasn't just that he had said it. It was that he had said it with such public, condescending pity. He hadn't just divorced her. He was trying to erase her, to define her as a relic of his past, a used thing with no future value. When Carmen finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "Sophia, are you there?" A single tear traced a path down Sophia's cheek. She wasn't sad. Sadness had been a dull ache for months. This was something new. This was a cold, clarifying rage. "I'm here, Carmen." Her voice was surprisingly steady. "Thank you for telling me." "What are you going to do?" Sophia looked around her apartment, at the books that were her only companions, at the reflection in the dark window of a woman she barely recognized. Leonardo had built his world on perception. He believed he had crafted her public image as a pitiful, forgotten woman. "I'm going to change the narrative," she said, the words feeling like a promise. "He thinks I'm invisible. He's about to find out what happens when a woman has nothing to lose." She didn't know how. She had no plan. But for the first time in a long time, the woman who had been defined by her husband for 2 decades felt the first glimmer of the person she used to be, a woman of intellect, passion, and an iron will that had merely been dormant, not dead. The tragedy wasn't her age. The tragedy was that she had ever believed her value was tied to him, and that was a mistake she would never make again. Do you think Sophia will be able to change the perception Leonardo has created of her? How do you think she will do it? The days following Carmen's call were a whirlwind of quiet fury. Sophia's rage didn't manifest in shouting or tears, but in a tense, focused energy that hummed just beneath her skin. The outside world felt hostile. Every time she left her apartment, she imagined people looking at her with the same pity Leonardo had projected. She saw him everywhere, his smug face on a business magazine cover at a newsstand, his name on a new luxury housing development she passed while walking. It was inescapable. Carmen, ever the loyal general, tried to cheer her up. "We've got to get you out of there, Sophia. Let's go to that new cocktail bar in Palermo. It's full of artists and writers, not those financial vultures Leonardo used to hang out with." "And why, Carmen?" Sophia asked listlessly, turning the pages of a book on the works of Artemisia Gentileschi. "To show myself off like a prize mare waiting for someone to notice I'm not quite ready for the glue factory?" "Stop it!" "Stop talking like him," Carmen chided gently. "His words are poison. It's hard not to drink it when he's poured it into the city's water supply." Despite her friend's efforts, Sophia retreated further into her shell. She felt like a ghost haunting the life she once had. The divorce settlement had been generous, but the money felt like severance pay for a long and thankless job. What she missed was not Leonardo, but a sense of purpose, of structure, a feeling of being a part of something. Now her days were formless, a vast, empty canvas. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she sorted through old mail, her hand brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope she had ignored for weeks. It was embossed with the logo of the Fondation de la Croix, a private arts organization known for its stunning collection of post-impressionist and modern art. She opened it with a letter opener, her movements mechanical. It was an invitation, not to a gala or a fundraiser, but to a private symposium. The Patron's Gaze, a symposium on private collecting and public trust, and it was a small, exclusive event for curators, academics, and a handful of major patrons. She realized with a jolt that her name was still on their list from her days as a doctoral student, long before she became Mrs. Leonardo Bianchi. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The thought of walking into a room full of people, of making small talk, was exhausting. She would be an outsider, a relic from a different life. Then her eyes landed on the list of speakers. The keynote would be given by Dr. Gabriel Delacroix. The name gave her a strange buzz. Gabriel Delacroix was a legend, but also a ghost. He was a tech billionaire, the architect behind the revolutionary data encryption firm Egida, a company so powerful and ubiquitous it operated quietly in the background of half the world's digital transactions. But unlike his peers, Delacroix was pathologically private. He didn't give interviews, had no social media presence, and was rarely photographed. His only known public's passion was art. He was rumored to own one of the world's most significant private art collections, a collection no one had actually seen. Sophia had followed his supposed acquisitions for years, the way a sports fan tracks their favorite team. He bought with the eye of a scholar, not an investor. He had once paid a record-breaking sum for a minor Camille Pissarro landscape, not because it was famous, but because it was the last piece Pissarro painted before his eyesight began to fail, and the brushwork told a story of urgency and failing light. This was a man who understood art not as a commodity, but as a language. The symposium was the next day. A wild, terrifying idea began to form in her mind. What if she went not to meet anyone, not to network, not to prove Leonardo wrong, but for herself? To spend a day in a world that had once been her entire universe. To hear people speak the language she loved. To feel, if only for a few hours, like the woman she was before she became a wife. "I'm going out," she told Carmen on the phone that night. "A miracle! Where? Should I put on heels?" "No, it's something for me." The next day, Sophia stood in front of her closet, a place full of designer gowns and power suits chosen to complement Leonardo's image. They felt like costumes for a role she no longer played. In the back, she found a simple charcoal gray dress, a well-made piece she had bought for her doctoral defense years ago. She paired it with low, sensible heels and a simple silver necklace. She didn't look like a billionaire's ex-wife or a socialite. She looked like what she was, a scholar. The symposium was held in the Foundation's private house, a magnificent limestone building near Avenida Alvear. The atmosphere was hushed and academic. No press, no photographers, just the low murmur of intelligent conversations and the scent of old wood and lemon wax. Sophia felt a wave of anxiety, but also a flicker of coming home. She slipped into a seat at the back of the small auditorium, content to be anonymous. The panels were fascinating debates on provenance, the ethics of repatriation, and the role of digital archives. For the first time in months, Sophia wasn't thinking about Leonardo, or Valentina, or what people thought of her. She was completely absorbed. Scribbling notes in a small moleskin notebook, the final speaker was Gabriel Delacroix. He wasn't what she expected. He was tall and lean, perhaps in his mid-50s, with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. He wore a simple, dark tweed jacket, no tie. He didn't speak from a podium, but walked slowly across the stage, his voice quiet and measured. His talk was brilliant. He spoke of art as a form of data, a repository of human experience, emotion, and history that was more complex and valuable than any digital code. He argued that collectors were not owners, but custodians, with a duty to preserve and eventually share. During the Q&A, a curator from the Malba asked a question about a recently discovered and disputed Modigliani sketch. The consensus of experts was that it was a clever forgery. Before Delacroix could answer, Sophia felt an irresistible pull. Without even thinking, she raised her hand. A moderator, surprised to see a hand in the back row, gestured to her. "Excuse me, Dr. Delacroix," she began, her voice clearer than she expected. "Although the craquelure is inconsistent with Modigliani's typical canvas preparation of the time, has anyone analyzed the pigment composition of the underlying drawing? His early work in Livorno, before moving to Paris, often used a specific burnt sienna earth, which was ground with a higher than usual linseed oil content. It creates a very particular chemical signature that would be nearly impossible for a forger to replicate unless they were also a materials historian." The room went silent. A few people twisted in their seats to look at her. Her analysis was arcane, specific, and deeply insightful. It was the kind of detail only someone who had spent hundreds of hours studying the subject would know. Gabriel Delacroix paused and looked directly at her. His gaze wasn't one of evaluation or dismissal. It was one of genuine, intellectual curiosity. A slow smile spread across his face. "That," his voice boomed across the quiet room, "is an extraordinarily astute observation. No, it has not been analyzed that way. You have just given the Reina Sofia Conservation Department a new line of inquiry." He held her gaze for a moment longer. "Thank you, Miss Rios," she said, her heart pounding. "Sofia Rios." He nodded slowly. "Miss Rios, thank you." As the symposium broke for a small reception, Sophia, flustered by her own audacity, tried to slip out unnoticed. She had done what she came to do. She had remembered who she was. "Miss Rios." She turned. Gabriel Delacroix was there, holding 2 glasses of water. He offered her one. "I was hoping I could have a moment," he said. "Your observation about the burnt sienna earth wasn't just astute. It was brilliant. That's a level of material knowledge rarely found outside a restoration lab." "I'm a conservator now," Sophia said, taking the glass. "An art historian. Or I was. It's been a while. A passion like that doesn't just go away," he said, his eyes kind. "Perhaps it lies dormant." He was looking at her mind. For the next hour, they stood in a quiet corner of the reception, and for the first time in 25 years, Sophia talked about art. She talked about the way Gentileschi used chiaroscuro, not just for dramatic effect, but as a weapon. She talked about the hidden political allegories in Renaissance portraits. She forgot where she was. She forgot about Leonardo. She forgot she was supposed to be too old. She was just Sophia. And for the first time, she felt that was more than enough. When she finally stepped out of the house into the late afternoon air, The city looked different. The lights seemed brighter, no longer hostile, but full of promise. She had walked into that building as a ghost, but she was walking out as herself. Do you think this encounter will change Sophia's life forever? What do you think will happen next? The days following the symposium were a revelation. Sophia had expected the encounter with Gabrielle Delacroix to be a singular bright spot in her otherwise gray existence. She had not expected a follow-up. But 2 days later, a messenger delivered a small, flat package to her apartment. Inside was not flowers or champagne, but a rare first edition of a book on the chemical composition of 18th century pigments. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Miss Rios, your insights have stayed with me. I suspect you might be one of the few people who would appreciate the chapter on Venetian ceruse. If you have the time, I would be honored if you would join me for a private viewing of some pieces that pose similar questions. Sincerely, Gabrielle Delacroix. He had included a private number. Sophia's hand trembled as she held the card. This wasn't a date, not in the traditional sense. It was an invitation into a world she believed was closed to her forever. It was a gesture of profound intellectual respect. She called the number. Their first date was not at a trendy restaurant or a flashy club. He sent a discreet car to pick her up, and it took her not to a public museum, but to an unmarked, climate-controlled warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside was a private gallery that took her breath away. It was a museum of one. Rothko canvases bled color across one wall. A Giacometti sculpture stood hauntingly in the center of the room, and a Francis Bacon triptych screamed silently from another. Gabriel was waiting for her, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. There were no assistants, no curators. He just wanted her to see them without distractions. To listen to what they have to say, he explained. For 3 hours, they walked and talked. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. He wanted her opinion, her visceral reaction, her academic interpretation. He would stand in front of a painting, his head tilted, and say, "I see despair here, but you mentioned something about Gentileschi using darkness as a weapon. Do you see that in this? Is the darkness a void, or is it an active presence?" Sophia, who had spent years making small talk about golf handicaps and summering on the coast, felt her mind unfurl like a sail catching the wind. She was eloquent, passionate, and brilliant. She challenged his interpretations, offered her own, and pointed out details he, the owner, had never noticed. This became their routine. Their courtship was a series of quiet, extraordinary adventures. One day, he flew her on his private jet to Mendoza, not for a day of wine tasting, but to spend 2 hours in a conservation lab at a private museum, looking at a newly acquired Degas sculpture under a microscope. Another night, they didn't go out at all. He came to her apartment, and they sat on the floor, surrounded by her art books, playfully arguing about the influence of Japanese woodcuts on Van Gogh. He never mentioned her past, her divorce, or Leonard. It was as if her life had only begun the moment she stood up at that symposium. He was interested in the Sophia Rios, who existed outside of any man's shadow. He was captivated by her mind, her passion, and the quiet strength she was only just rediscovering in herself. "You have an astonishing eye, Sophia," he told her one night, as they stood in front of a moody, beautiful portrait by an unknown Flemish master. "It's a gift. To let it lie dormant is a crime against an entire field of study." "I didn't think anyone cared about this field anymore," she admitted, her voice soft. "Or about me?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "The world is loud, and it celebrates the wrong things. It celebrates noise over substance, perception over reality. But that doesn't mean substance and reality have lost their value. It just means they're harder to find. He paused, his gaze soft and infinitely more precious when you do find them. Meanwhile, Leonardo Bianchi was living in a very different reality. His life with Valentina was a whirlwind of public appearances and forced happiness. They were at every opening, every launch party, their photos plastered across gossip sites. Leonardo loved it. He felt powerful, desired. A king with his young queen. He heard whispers about Sofia through the gossip mill. Marco Gomez had mentioned seeing her with some sort of academic. Leonardo laughed. "Good for her," he told Marco during a squash game, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm glad she found a friend. Probably some dusty professor. As long as she's happy, right?" He genuinely believed it. He couldn't conceive of a world where Sofia could find anyone who wasn't a pale, pathetic shadow of himself. In his mind, he was the pinnacle. Anyone she found would be a step down, proof that he had been right to leave her. Valentina, whose worldview was shaped by social media metrics, reinforced his delusion. Like, who would seriously date someone that old? She had said one night while scrolling through her phone. No offense to Sofia, but her brand just kind of expired. Leonardo had nodded along, basking in the validation. He was so blinded by his own ego that he didn't notice the signs. He didn't notice that the quiet, deferential woman he had divorced was slowly being replaced by a confident, engaged intellectual. He didn't notice because he had never truly seen her in the first place. The turning point came one night at Gabriel's home, a stunning, minimalist house that valued light and space over ostentation. He had commissioned a report on the feasibility of a new global art foundation, dedicated to funding material historical research and provenance verification. He handed the thick file to Sofia. "I'm thinking of endowing a new foundation," he said simply. "I believe it could change how we protect and understand art, but a foundation is only as good as the person who runs it." He looked directly at her. "I want you to be its director, Sofia. I'll provide the capital. You, the vision. You would have total autonomy." Sofia was speechless. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a restoration. It was him handing her the tools to rebuild the part of her life she had been forced to abandon. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a year, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "Gabriel, you don't have to answer now," he said kindly. "But you should know that I see you, Sofia Rios, and I think you are extraordinary." Later that night, as they stood on his terrace overlooking the city, he gently took her hand. It wasn't Leonardo's possessive grip, but a warm, steady presence. "There's another reason I want you to run the foundation," he said, his voice a low murmur against the city hum. "It would make coordinating our schedules much easier, assuming you'd be willing to marry me." Sofia's heart stopped. It wasn't a grand, dramatic proposal. It was quiet, confident, and completely sincere. It was a proposal from a man who wanted a partner, not a possession. He wasn't asking the woman who would run his household. He was asking the woman who would run a global foundation. He was asking her. She looked at his face, lit by the city lights, and saw her future. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about respect. It was about being seen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you." They sealed their engagement not with a diamond ring selfie for Instagram, but with a quiet champagne toast, their conversation immediately turning to the exciting plans for their future and for the foundation. They were a team. Neither of them thought of Leonardo Bianchi. But on another side of the city, the gears of fate were turning. preparing for a revelation that would shatter one man's carefully constructed world and expose the void at its center. The quiet courtship was over. The storm was about to break. What do you think will happen to Leonardo now that Sophia is about to marry Gabriel Delacroix? Do you think this story will have an unexpected twist? The next fortnight began like any other for Leonardo Bianchi. He woke up in his sterile, glass-walled penthouse, Valentina still asleep beside him, her face squashed against a silk pillowcase. He went through his morning routine with the precision of a machine. A cold plunge, a custom protein shake, and a scan of the financial news on his tablet. He was on top of the world, and he knew it. A major deal to develop a new luxury tower in the west of the city was close to completion, a deal that would cement his legacy as one of the city's premier developers. He arrived at his office at Bianchi de Sarolos, a monument of steel and ego in the city center, feeling invincible. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Carla, greeted him with his usual espresso. "Good morning, Mr. Bianchi. Your 10 a.m. meeting with the zoning board is confirmed." "Excellent, Carla. Any fires I need to put out?" he asked, heading for his corner office. "No, sir. Everything is quiet." But everything was not quiet. At newsstands across Buenos Aires, a different story was breaking. It wasn't on the cover of La Nación or in the gossip columns. It was on the cover of El Inversor Sofisticado, a sophisticated and influential magazine, read by old money and the truly powerful. It was the kind of magazine Leonardo desperately wanted to be in, but never was. They preferred substance to flash. The cover was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a black and white photograph taken by a world-renowned photographer. In it, Sofia Rios was laughing. Not a posed, self-conscious laugh, but one of genuine, unadulterated joy. She wasn't wearing a ball gown, but a simple, elegant cashmere sweater. Her hair was loose, and her face, the face of a 48-year-old woman, was luminous. Her hand rested on the arm of a man who sat beside her, his own expression one of quiet, profound adoration. That man was Gabriel Delacroix. The headline, in bold, classic lettering, read, "Silence Broken. The enigmatic Gabriel Delacroix. On love, art, and the woman who changed everything, announcing his engagement to scholar Sofia Rios." The first tremor of Leonardo's fall didn't happen in his office, but at the exclusive squash club where his rival, Marco Gomez, was having a post-workout breakfast. Marco choked on his avocado toast as his partner slid the magazine across the table. His eyes widened first with disbelief, then with pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He immediately took a photo of the cover with his phone. The text message hit Leonardo's phone just as he sat down for his meeting. It was from Marco. No words, just the photo of the magazine cover. Leonardo stared at it. His brain couldn't process the image. Sophia laughing with... He squinted. At first, he didn't recognize the man. He looked like a university professor. Then, he read the headline. Gabriel Delacroix. The name hit him like a physical blow. Gabriel Delacroix, the reclusive tech god. The man whose net worth was rumored to be in the 12-figure range, a number that made Leonardo's considerable fortune seem like pocket change. It wasn't possible. This had to be a joke, a sophisticated prank. Sophia, his academic, bookish ex-wife, whom he had publicly pitied for being too old to date, was engaged to one of the wealthiest, most private, and most respected men on the planet. "Mr. Bianchi," one of the zoning officials said, looking at him with concern. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." Leonardo shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion and rage. "Fine. he managed to croak. "Let's begin." But he couldn't concentrate. The words at the meeting were just noise. His mind was racing, replaying his own arrogant declarations at the charity gala. Past her expiration date. A tragedy. He had said it so loudly, so publicly. He had defined her as worthless. And now she was on the cover of El Inversor Sofisticado, not as a tragic figure, but as the chosen partner of a man who personified value. The news spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. Phones buzzed from Recoleta to Palermo. The story was irresistible. It wasn't just about the staggering upgrade in wealth. It was the poetic justice of it all. Everyone had heard Leonardo's cruel words. Everyone had seen him parading his young girlfriend. Now, the tables hadn't just turned. They had been launched into orbit. By the time Leonardo returned to his office, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual deference from his staff was now tinged with something else, a mixture of shock, pity, and a morbid curiosity. Carla couldn't meet his eyes. "Hold all my calls," he snapped, slamming his office door shut. He opened his laptop and found the article online. It was worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't a simple announcement. It was a beautifully written profile, detailing Sophia's brilliant academic past and her sharp, insightful mind. It quoted Delacroix extensively. "Sophia possesses a clarity of thought and a passion for truth that is exceptionally rare. The world is full of people who shout. She is one of the few who knows how to listen, who knows how to see. Marrying her is the smartest decision I've ever made." The article went on to announce the formation of the Delacroix Rios Arts Foundation, with Sofia Rios named its inaugural director, endowed with an initial fund of $500 million. Leonardo felt the air leave his lungs. Director of a $500 million foundation. He had reduced her to her age. Gabrielle Delacroix had elevated her for her intellect. He had not just lost the public relations battle, he had been annihilated. He was no longer the successful man who had cast off his aging wife. He was now the idiot who had let an incalculable treasure get away. He was the joke. His personal phone rang. It was Valentina, her voice a panicked shriek. "Leonardo, have you seen it? Everyone is texting me. Jessica from my yoga class sent me the cover. Is it real? Is your ex-wife really marrying that guy? The guy who, owns the internet?" "It's an exaggeration, Valentina," he snapped. His patience had run out. "Well, everyone is talking about it, and they're talking about what you said at the gala. It's super awkward for me now." Her concern was not for him, or even for Sophia. It was for her own social standing, which had become inextricably linked to his. Suddenly, being Leonardo's girlfriend wasn't such a good look. He was no longer the powerful victor. He was the cosmic fool. The final blow came an hour later. It was a call from his main investor on the West Tower project, a conservative old money firm. "Leonardo," the man said, his voice cold and distant. "We're seeing some concerning chatter. This public situation with your ex-wife reflects poorly. It speaks to a certain lack of judgment." "What?" "It's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with business," Leonardo stammered. "In our world, character is business," the investor replied flatly. "Gabrielle Delacroix sits on the board of 2 of our parent companies. We cannot do business with a man who is now, for all intents and purposes, a public embarrassment to him. We are invoking the character clause in our contract. We are withdrawing our funding." The line went dead. Leonardo stared at the phone in his hand. The West Tower, his legacy project, the deal that was supposed to make him untouchable, had vanished. It had evaporated in a single morning, all because of a magazine cover. He had built his empire on perception, and in the blink of an eye, the perception had shifted. He wasn't the shark. He was the bait. He slumped over and put his head in his hands. The silence of his opulent office was suddenly deafening. He had told everyone his ex-wife was a tragedy. He had just realized the tragedy was his own. Do you think Leonardo will learn from his mistakes? How do you think his life will change after this? Humiliation is a potent acid. For Leonardo Bianchi, it burned through his ego, his reputation, and now his finances. The collapse of the West Tower deal sent shockwaves through his company. Bianchi Desarrollos was heavily leveraged, banking on the success of that project. The public withdrawal of a major investor over a character clause was a signal to every other bank and partner. Leonardo was a bad bet. Credit lines tightened. Whispers of insolvency began to circulate. His personal life unraveled just as quickly. Valentina, whose loyalty was to status, not a man, saw the writing on the wall. Their arguments became more frequent and vicious. "This is your fault, Leonardo," she had shrieked during an explosive fight. "You just had to open your big mouth about your ex. You made us a joke. Do you know what it's like to go to brunch and have everyone pity you?" 2 weeks after the magazine came out, Valentina was gone. She didn't even say goodbye in person. Just a short text message before a moving van quietly emptied her belongings from the penthouse. Her Instagram was scrubbed clean of all photos of him, replaced with cryptic posts about new beginnings and cutting toxic energy. Broke and increasingly desperate, Leonardo did what he never thought he would. He tried to contact Sofia. His first attempts were calls and text messages, all unanswered. Then he sent a long, rambling email, a pathetic blend of feigned remorse and veiled threats about their shared history. It, too, was met with silence. Finally, he resorted to the unthinkable. He went to her apartment building in Recoleta, a place he hadn't been since his lawyers had split their assets. He buzzed her apartment, his heart pounding with a toxic cocktail of rage and desperation. A voice answered through the intercom, but it wasn't Sofia's. It was the calm, firm voice of a security professional. "Who's calling for Miss Rios?" "It's Leonardo Bianchi, her ex-husband. I need to speak to her. It's urgent." There was a pause. "Miss Rios is not taking visitors. Please leave the premises, Mr. Bianchi." "Just tell her I'm here. Tell her I need to apologize," he yelled at the small metal box. "If you do not leave, we will be forced to call the police." Defeated, Leonardo stumbled back onto the street. He was blocked, not just from her building, but from her life. From the world of respectability he had once commanded. He looked up at her window, imagining her inside, living a life that was now completely inaccessible to him. Did she hate him? Was she enjoying his downfall? The truth was, Sofia rarely thought about him. Her life was full. She was immersed in the launch of the foundation, recruiting a world-class board of directors, and reviewing grant proposals from scholars around the globe. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, research, and passionate debate with Gabriel, who was not just her fiancé, but her most enthusiastic intellectual sparring partner. Her happiness was not built on Leonardo's ruin. It was built on her own rediscovery. The news of his professional and personal collapse reached her, of course, through Carmen, who delivered it with a grim satisfaction. Sofia felt a distant, detached sadness, the way one might feel hearing about the misfortune of a former colleague from a long-ago job. He was a chapter in her life that was now closed, and she had no desire to reread it. One evening, she and Gabriel were having a quiet dinner at home. Sofia mentioned Leonardo's failed attempts to contact her. "He seems to be unraveling," she said, not with malice, but with a kind of clinical observation. "Carmen said the West Tower deal was the final nail in the coffin for his company." Gabriel sipped his wine, his expression unreadable. The lead investors in that project, the parent firm, is a private equity group called Northern Star Investments. They value discretion and character above all else. I'm surprised they acted so quickly based on what was essentially high society gossip. Sophia mused. Gabriel put his glass down and looked at her. It wasn't just gossip, Sophia. I sit on the board of Northern Star Investments. Sophia stared at him, the implications slowly sinking in. It felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Gabriel, you didn't. I would never. Your revenge, if it can even be called that, was to live a life so full and happy that he became irrelevant. That was your victory, and it was perfect. He paused, choosing his words carefully. However, at our quarterly board meeting, the topic of our portfolio's risk exposure came up. I merely shared my opinion, as a board member, that any firm associated with a man who showed such profoundly deficient judgment, cruelty, and public instability as Leonardo Bianchi was, by definition, an unacceptable risk. Character, as I believe he was told, is business. The board agreed. It was a simple, logical business decision. It was the twist. The one that Leonardo's downfall wasn't cosmic karma or bad luck. It was a quiet, clinical, and utterly devastating checkmate, executed by a man who operated on a level Leonardo couldn't even comprehend. Gabriel hadn't stooped to Leonardo's level. He had simply operated from his own, and in doing so, he had wiped him off the board. It wasn't an act of passion. It was an act of consequence. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "For seeing a bad investment and protecting your portfolio," she replied. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. He smiled back, a rare, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The ghost of Leonardo Bianchi had finally been exorcised, not with a scream, but with the quiet closing of a ledger. Weeks later, Carmen sent Sophia a link to a tabloid article. The headline was sensational. "Bankrupt real estate magnate, Leonardo Bianchi, spotted moving into a rental in Buenos Aires suburbs." The accompanying photo was grainy, showing a gaunt, unshaven Leonardo carrying a cardboard box into a modest suburban townhouse. He was alone. Sophia looked at the photo of the man who had declared her old and useless. He had chased youth and perception and had lost everything of real value. She had embraced her age, her intellect, her true self, and had gained a world of substance and happiness. She closed the link without a hint of triumph, just a quiet sense of finality. She turned back to the pile of proposals on her desk, her mind already on the future, a future she was building on her own terms. The narrative was, at last, hers to write. 6 months later, the Delacroix Rios Arts Foundation held its inaugural exhibition. The event wasn't held in a stuffy hotel ballroom, but in a beautifully restored cast-iron building in the Palermo neighborhood. Its industrial bones now housed a state-of-the-art gallery. The air didn't hum with the brittle chatter of social climbers, but with the excited murmur of artists, curators, and academics from around the world. The exhibition, curated and conceived entirely by Sophia, was titled Palimpsesto, The Hidden Stories. It was a stunning collection of works where artists had painted over older canvases or where restoration had revealed hidden histories. At the center of the room, on a simple podium, stood Sophia Rios. Dressed in a striking navy blue dress, elegant rather than ostentatious, she radiated a quiet, self-assured authority. She wasn't Gabriel Delacroix's wife tonight. She was Director Rios, and this was her stage. "A palimpsest," she began, her clear voice echoing through the room, is a manuscript on which a later writing has been superimposed over an earlier erased one. It is a metaphor for memory, for history, for truth, that what is erased never truly disappears. It remains, waiting for a careful eye to discover it. In the audience, Gabriel watched her, his pride a quiet, palpable force. He wasn't in the front, but slightly to the side, allowing her the full spotlight. He was not the source of her light. He was simply happy to stand in its warmth. Near the back of the crowd, a familiar face watched with a look of stunned awe. It was Marco Gomez, Leonardo's old rival. He had wangled an invitation because this was now the most important room in Buenos Aires. He remembered Leonardo's mocking words at the gala with perfect clarity. Too old to date. A tragedy. He looked at the radiant, brilliant woman holding the attention of the art world's most powerful figures, and he felt a chill. Leonardo had seen a faded manuscript and tried to burn it. Gabrielle had seen the same manuscript, recognized its priceless value, and given its author the tools to write her own magnificent new story. The artists here teach us that nothing is ever truly finished, Sophia concluded. We are all layered texts, capable of being revised, restored, and reread in a new and brighter light. Thank you. The applause was thunderous and genuine. When Sophia stepped down, she was surrounded by congratulations. A venerable director from the Louvre complimented her on her vision. A young, explosive artist, whose work she had championed, hugged her with gratitude. After a few minutes, Gabriel worked his way through the crowd to her side. He didn't say a word, just offered her a glass of champagne, his eyes conveying everything. "You were brilliant," he murmured, for her ears only. "I was me," she said, a smile of pure satisfaction on her face. It was the simplest, most profound truth. Her past was not erased, but it no longer defined her. It was simply the erased text beneath a much more interesting story, one whose most exciting chapters were still yet to be written. In the end, this isn't just a story of revenge. It's a powerful lesson about value. Leonardo Bianchi believed a woman's value was tied to her youth and her proximity to a powerful man. He saw Sophia as an asset whose worth had depreciated. What he failed to grasp is that things like integrity, intellect, and grace have no expiration date. They accrue interest. Sophia's triumph wasn't marrying a billionaire. That was just the dramatic final act. Her true victory was rediscovering her own worth in a world that tried to tell her she had none. She didn't need a man to save her. She just needed to remember the brilliant woman she was before she met Leonardo. Her story is a testament to the fact that the best revenge is not stooping to their level, but building a life so magnificent that they are no longer part of your landscape. What did you think of Sophia's incredible journey? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of rewriting your own story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life dramas that will leave you thinking.